Welcome to Book and Lounge. I'm your host, Jacqueline. In this episode, we are discussing Maybe I Don't Belong Here, a memoir of race, identity, breakdown and recovery by David Harewood. I'm joined by Yvonne and Katrina to discuss the book. Let's jump into the conversation. Thank you, Yvonne. Thank you, Katrina, for joining this evening. So we're going to be discussing Maybe I Don't Belong Here, which is a memoir by David Harewood, a memoir of race, identity, breakdown and recovery. So in the book, David Harewood shares his experience with psychosis and how it's affected his mental health. And it's really a deep exploration of the duality of growing up Black and British and about his recovery from the psychosis that he suffered as a result of his struggle with his identity. So I wanted to start off with by asking you what you thought about the book. Who wants to go first? I'll pick Katrina.
Yes, I did enjoy the book. Yeah, basically, it's very interesting. It's interesting to read his account and to see what's gone on in his life, and just to hear his account and how he's tried to come to terms with it. He seems to, despite, I suppose, the unlucky things that happened to him that perhaps helped to tip him into psychosis, he seems to have really been very lucky in his recovery from it and actually in his acting career. I have seen him, but he's not someone I've followed and watched a lot of. But he must be quite gifted as an actor, I think, that he was noticed from a young age. Actors who sort of struggle, they're always, doing other jobs. His account makes him sound very successful from an early stage.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yvonne, what did you think?
I thought it was a really powerful book. It was such an eye-opener because I didn't grow up in this country. I came as a young adult. So, I'm probably not aware of the real impact that racism has on Black mental health. Because I think if you went to school here and you were Black and it was in the 60s, 70s and 80s, possibly 90s, it wasn't fun if you had to step out of your house and run to school and run back because of what might happen to you. I found it really, really enlightening. I enjoyed his style of writing as well because it's almost like he's just talking to you. So these are really powerful messages, but delivered not in a complicated way. So I found it powerful. I don't know if I can say I enjoyed it. I think it's a very important book, particularly when we think about, I didn't quite realize how prevalent mental health is with the Black community. I thought it was just the same. I thought there were as many Black as there were as many white people with mental health problems. In terms of, when you think that we probably are just maybe 8% of the population or less. So I was not aware at all that this was going on.
Yeah.
But having read the book, I can understand why. And now I think I'm a lot more sympathetic as well to young Black people that have grown up in the sort of 70s, 80s, 90s. Because it's been, they've had a difficult, challenging, and they continue to have a difficult and challenging time.
Yeah. I was one of those that had to run home from school. So I lived in West London where the National Front had a very strong presence. So we were bullied. I think I was one of 3 Black people in my year. And yes, had to run from school basically to get home safely. So I sort of kind of understand some of the things that he's talking about. With the book itself, I agree with you. It's a very important book. And it's, one that's really recommended reading for all young men, Black men out there. I think it's very important. However, having said that, I sort of, on the other end, with regards to the writing style, I didn't like the writing style at all. I just thought it was repetitive. I don't want to be mean. he's an actor. He's not a writer, I guess. And
That's
so it was simplistic and also quite repetitive in my view. And
No, I agree. I think the value of the book is its content.
yeah.
You're not. I wouldn't recommend it for its literature. I mean, it's fine. It's easy reading, but nothing. It didn't grab me in that sense at all. But parts of the book where it is about his, the things that have probably helped him to become, to have that psychotic episode and everything are very interesting. And what you were saying, Yvonne, about growing up in this country, I think, as a white person, it's interesting as well, because I was at school there were not very many, but there were one or two black children in my secondary school and at my primary school, but I was friends. I went to a girls' Catholic school, so I don't know what difference it makes, but I was friends with a girl. I have no idea whether she had those experiences. She didn't when she was with me, but she may well have. And, it just was, it'd be very interesting for me to meet her now and ask her some of these things because, I would have been completely oblivious to it unless she told me because I didn't walk home from school with her. I don't know what happened to her when she was out of school.
And Katrina, actually, it was quite interesting what you say about your friend and how you have no idea that what she went through. And I think that's precisely the issue with racism. It's not something that people, even amongst Black people, it's not something that people actually talk about. You don't come back from work and say, oh, I've had a racist experience. No one, things happen to you and you just don't discuss it. Even within families, you don't discuss it. It's only at one point my brother said to me, I mean, my brother is like 6 foot and he's a big black man, as the book says. And he just told me something that every time he gets into a taxi, the taxi driver asks for the money up front. This was before Uber. They asked for the money up front. And I said, well, is that allowed? And he says, well, that's my experience. That's because they don't trust that I will actually pay or I'll run away. I mean, this is a professional young man who was working in the city, but because he's big and black, he said it quite casually, just in passing. It wasn't even a thing. So I don't think, even as Black people, we discuss it, do we, Jackie?
No, it's not something you talk about. I mean, okay, now I think I'm much more likely to talk about it because I think I have a group of friends who we tend to share a lot of experiences with. So I think now, if something like that happened to me at work, I think I'm much more likely to vent about it. But growing up, it's when I was going home and we were being chased from school, I didn't tell my parents. Didn't. I mean, even then, what would they have done? They would have sent me back to the same school the following day anyway. and also, this is the other thing. I don't think my parents would have actually gone to school to complain. It was just a fact of life. You just got on with life, basically. I can see how it would affect your mind, like it did David. My brother does suffer psychosis. And he has mental health issues and he's been sectioned several times. So, I mean, all of that, I think, stems from how he was treated as a child and then all the other events that happened that triggered off the mental health. I mean, I remember when my brother was in primary school, so it must have been about 6 or 7. And this is back in the day when they used to get school dinners and lunch and all of that. I remember he came back home and said that he didn't finish his lunch. And his teacher told him to put it in an envelope and send it to Africa. Now, can you imagine?
But that was quite a popular thing. Like I remember that at primary school, there was that sort of saying that you should eat up because we can't send your dinner overseas to children who might need it. So that was a popular thing in that era, I think, to say to children. Don't waste food. Someone else might need it, but we can't give it to them.
But for you to say that to a child, put it in an envelope and then send it to Africa, I just found that, I mean, at the time I was like, oh, that's a bit bad. But then now when I think back and look at him like, that's really racist.
Yeah.
And I think, but it is.
It is, but not in the minds of the people who were saying it, they're just saying about don't waste food. Somebody might need it.
But are they not starving people on the streets of London? Why not? Why can't they say put it in in a carrier bag and go and give it to the homeless man sitting outside the train station? Why are we picking on Africa?
Yeah. Well, that's how we look at that now. But if you go back to, like, I'm thinking back in the 70s or the 60s, really, primary school. I was at school in the 60s. I don't think, people just weren't thinking like that.
Katrina, this was in the 90s.
Okay, fine. And that shows you how bad it is, and it shows you how old I am, because I sort of imagine these things surely we've got over that, but apparently not. But I only know that when somebody tells, I'm not at school anymore. I don't know.
Yeah. So, well, anyway.
It is dreadful, isn't it?
It is. So I'm coming back to the book, and I guess David and his experiences. How do you think his experience growing up in Birmingham shaped his identity and sense of belonging and self-worth? Because he grows up with his brothers and sister and parents, quite a wholesome family setting. They experienced quite a lot of racist abuse in their first home, so they moved home to another area where it wasn't as bad as in the first area. And he was in school where there were a few other Black people. He had friends all over the place. What did you guys think of his growing up, and how that shaped his identity?
As you say, I think that's the part I liked the most, where he was with his family. They were watching TV. There was a lot of laughter. Yes, there was a lot of racism around, and he experienced it. The only thing that has sort of surprised me was he didn't really grow up thinking about that he was Black.
Yeah.
Which I found surprising, given that he had all this abuse hurled at him.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I think, he decided it's best to just assimilate. And because you're one of the only few Blacks in the school and all your friends are white, you forget you're Black.
I got the impression although he had these experiences of racism, which they are very obvious in the book when he's writing about it, but my impression was that he had enough places in his life as a child where he was actually felt himself accepted, where he felt at ease, where he was enjoying himself in school and with his friend, that, he could minimize those when he was growing up. Like, okay, that bad thing happened, but that's a smaller part at that time. And he didn't realize how it could come back on him. Do you get what I mean? I mean, you think of things that happen to you when you're a child, and anybody might get bullied on a certain day or in a certain circumstance. You go home and you put that out of your mind. You're enjoying yourself at home and you feel at ease. I think he must have done that when he was a child, but when there were enough stresses on him as he grew older, those things, they all come back.
Yeah, I think he did. I think he focused just on the positives.
Yeah.
And was able to sail through life in primary school, secondary school. I mean, like most people.
And I think as a child, I think it's fine to forget. It's fine not to realize, not to dwell so much on your identity, because as a child, you're growing up, and also you've got a lot of other things that grab your attention. So race and identity are not going to be top priority at that point. But I think that as he grows up and then he finishes school and goes into acting, I still think he did not really. I still think he saw himself as British, and he completely neglected the Black part of him. And I think that's where his problem started. The fact that he identified very much as being British and assimilated completely within the society, and then just forgot a bit about his being Black. And I think that's, one of the causes of his psychosis, because he's just not digested that actually I am Black and society is going to treat me a certain way. As a child, I can understand. As an adult and as he was growing up, I struggled to understand how he couldn't recognize that he was black and that was going to cause him a few issues.
I think he was a little bit naive, but I can also understand in the comfort of a college or a university where you belong and you excel and you're praised and you're doing an excellent job as a student. I can see how it can happen.
Mm.
But I think it was a little bit naive of him to think that he would venture into the world. And because what he says is that it's when he does his first play, I think his first job, and then the reviews started coming.
Yeah.
And there were references to his race mainly.
It was in the statement that he was more like Mike Tyson.
Mike Tyson.
Than Romeo.
Than Romeo. I thought that was... I must admit, I thought that was quite funny. But this is a young man who was taking his craft really seriously, and he didn't want to be cast as a black actor. I think he wanted to be seen as an actor.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Which is what he should be.
Yes, so that's why I think he found it very challenging.
I think that comes across very much when, I'm not sure whether it's before or after his psychotic episode, but when he's on that workshop and he's in the country in Kent or somewhere with, presumably they were all white participants.
Yeah.
And they had a discussion about characters being written like they have to be written for a black character. But, like you've got a part in a play that isn't ascribed to anybody. And the person who was leading the workshop was just like automatically assuming, that's got to be a white person because it doesn't say it's a black person.
Yeah.
And I think that's what he hadn't come to terms with, because of course he's right, but it's also a fact that, there's a lot of white people who see it in that perspective. Even, now is the same, I think. That's a sort of clash, isn't it? He thinks, he can just be an actor and he can be Romeo or anybody, which of course he should be. And for some people he can be. And then other people have got it set in their mind of how people are meant to look.
That Romeo should look a certain way. Like, just going back to his upbringing in Birmingham, he, as I say, he grows up with this really, what sounds to me like a really fun family. And his parents, they try and instill a sense of identity within him. His mother tries to talk to him about his culture. They have West Indian nights where the parents have parties and they have aunties and uncles and everybody else around. They're very much into their cricket. And so it kind of made me wonder how he somehow managed to miss the identity.
Don't you think, though, when children are growing up, they quite often want to, as if their family is a bit different from the other families of, children at school, that they can reject that. And he thought he could reject it.
But that normally stops when you reach a certain age. And also all that work that the parents have done, at some point, actually, you start to identify more with their upbringing than trying to identify with your friends and what you've learned at school. At least I find that with age. As a child, yes, you try and reject everything that your parents teach you. But as you get older, you're actually valuing what they've taught you. And so I would have expected him at some point to start actually looking back at what he's, growing up West Indian, enjoying things West Indian, but he doesn't seem to. He just seems to have then moved on to London and then just assimilated with his new friends in London.
But even growing up in Birmingham, he doesn't talk about black friends. There's mention of a white girlfriend. We don't know that he had black friends, and so therefore, if that's the case, and it could simply be because he's in a school where it's predominantly white.
Yeah,
try to fit in. And maybe there were not that many black girls either. So for me, it seems perfectly normal if you're in that environment.
Mm-hmm. So moving on then, how do you feel about his honesty and vulnerability in sharing his personal and professional struggles with mental health, racism, and identity?
Well, I think he's done something very important there. And I think he's, as you say, he's shared his vulnerabilities. And one of the things you notice in the book is that there's a lot of things he doesn't tell you about. So he has made a deliberate thing of exposing this and bringing it up for discussion, obviously, because he thinks it's something, as as the book progresses, you can see he thinks it's something that needs to be spoken about more. And it's, what he experienced is probably experienced by a lot more people than we actually realise in normal life, because people don't talk about that either.
Yeah, I mean, I think his honesty is welcome, because I think he's describing the experience of many people, particularly probably Black males that have at some point been physically restrained by police officers, that have been sedated, that have been hospitalized and locked up in hospitals. I think it's a story that needs to be told. I mean, it's something that completely blew my mind, this book.
It is also very hopeful, isn't it? Because he came out from that episode and carried on to be successful. And so often I think when we hear of somebody who's had some sort of mental health breakdown, I think we tend to think they're not going to come back perhaps stronger than before, that they will be sort of blighted by that experience.
And in many cases, that is the truth. In many cases, they don't.
But
But don't you think it's also the way we've approached it? Because, I mean, he's been very open and transparent, and there's always a bit of shame, particularly within, I think, the Black community. I don't know about everyone else. There's shame that surrounds mental health, and there's secrecy. No one talks about it. And if your child should be in this position, you don't share it with anyone. You don't seek help. You
pray about it.
Sorry?
You pray about it.
You pray
about it, yes.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think it's so important that by having these conversations, because that's when you realize that, no, it's happening to a lot of people.
And unfortunately, a lot of people don't make it like he did. Yeah.
No, they don't. But part of that might be a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. If you and everyone around you thinks that you're not going to come back from that, it's going to be even more difficult to do so, isn't it? Whereas if you've read this book or you've watched a documentary and think, well, actually he got over that, maybe it's not dooming my son, or I'm not doomed. Do you see what I mean?
I don't know. I'm not even sure that people don't come out of it because they see it as a self-fulfilling prophecy. I think it's more that the support is not there. The systems, the NHS mental health services is very, very badly funded. So you don't get the support, you don't get the therapy. And
don't you think his story is, well, for me, I think, my husband had a breakdown. It wasn't a psychotic breakdown, but it was a breakdown, and it was the mental health services were quite useless. But I think when you get these sort of stories, they at least make you feel actually some people find their way through this.
Absolutely. But I think what I'm saying is, yes, some people do find their way out of it. The majority don't.
No, they don't. Yeah. Apparently, anyway. Except that we don't know how many people do, and are never telling anybody about it.
So, you mean people who go through mental health issues, I just don't say and don't seek the help that they need, and so we don't really know whether the statistics are complete. No, that's a fair point. What do you think triggered his psychosis? Was it the weed? Was it the constant rejections? Was it the criticism?
I think it was all three in a nutshell.
Because he was smoking a whole load of weed, wasn't he?
It couldn't have helped him, could it, on top of everything else?
What issues was he actually experiencing? So he had the rejections for jobs. He had the bad criticism from various critics when he played certain roles.
I think he also felt like he was stuck in the middle because he seemed to be getting a lot of rejection from the Black community. For some reason, he felt that he wasn't Black enough. That's because he talked about how he was drinking a lot, because you're supposed to get to production half an hour before, you get settled, you relax, and maybe have a glass. And he was drinking and arriving 5 minutes before because he just couldn't stand to be around these people.
And there was somebody or more than one person that were deliberately sort of needling him or winding him up in some way, wasn't there, in amongst the cast?
Yes.
There was some sort of bitchy or whatever behaviour going on that he didn't feel happy in that
environment.
Yes.
So I think it was a combination of drinking, of weed, rejection, and that's what tipped him over.
I got the feeling that none of his friends that he surrounded himself with were Black. I got the feeling that all his friends from drama school were white. And I'm just wondering, did you think that having a Black friend, or at least a Black group of people that he could go and hang out with every so often, would have helped him?
Well, I think certainly post-psychosis, he did start to hang around with some good, outstanding Black men, and they did him a lot of good. I mean, I suppose then the question is, with friendship, are we actively going out of our way to seek Black friends or white friends, or do you just connect with who you connect with?
No, I think it's fine. You connect with who you connect with at the end of the day. But I find it problematic when a Black person only has white friends. Because, you cannot just connect with white people, right?
Well, I just think because in Birmingham, if you look back to when he was growing up, all his friends were white. I'm assuming all his girlfriends were white. So what is to say when he comes to London, it's people that he's comfortable with.
So he's not comfortable with that. So then what we're saying is that
that's why he's not comfortable with who he is. He's not comfortable with himself.
He needs actors. He needs people who've got the interest in the Shakespeare and so on that he's very interested in. And he's finding those people amongst white people.
But again, I can argue that all my friends absolutely not involved with anything to do with my profession. Surely you need a diverse group of people to be friends with.
That's you.
I think the trouble started really when he left.
Yeah.
And he was now obviously interacting with everyone, including Black people. And it turns out that he felt rejected by people of his color to some extent.
But isn't that because, I'm guessing we're talking about the play people were walking out of. But I think people were offended by the character in the play. That's why they were walking out. And yes, I understand where then critics started criticizing him for playing the character in the first place. I get that. However, I think, if I went to a play, no matter who's playing a character, if I'm so offended by what that character is saying about my people, I might be tempted to walk out. But anyway, Tayo makes a decent point that if you identify with your Englishness and completely neglect all your, your other part, which is the black part of you, why would you not only have white friends? Because you identify as English, and as far as you're concerned, you're English. So why should you have to choose? And I guess for him, being English and British was a big thing.
But also this thing about the Black people who walked out of the audience, in some ways, perhaps, I don't know, I'm not clear from what you wrote, but in some ways, perhaps he could be more prepared for white people rejecting him. Huh? But then when you get the rejection from someone who he perhaps might assume are going to support him because, he is Black, they're Black, that might also be very jarring experience for him. Even though it might be justified, as you explained, but in his way of interpreting it, it could be quite jarring because sometimes it's more painful, isn't it, when people who you just imagine are supporting you.
But also in that interpretation, is he not then being naive? Should he not be able to understand why these people are offended and why they're walking out? Isn't he being a bit naive in expecting them just to accept that, he's acting this character?
He
and
is naive. He is naive in that part of the book, isn't he? He's a young man, and we, like you're saying, wouldn't we be all of us be better off with a diverse group of friends? That's probably true, but it doesn't mean that when you're young, you think of it that way. He'd probably look back now and he might totally agree with you. But at the time, it wasn't a big thing for him, was it? It didn't matter to him at that point.
And so he does recover. He goes on to be a successful Hollywood actor. And why is his story different? Why does he recover where others don't? What do you think is different about him?
I think that's the problem with mental illness, isn't it? We just don't know enough about the triggers, people's responses, the treatments.
I mean, it does seem that he seemed to have a good support structure in terms of his friends.
Yeah.
But particularly in terms of, and his mother.
Yeah.
Because remember, he went back home for a month and his mom looked after him. And I think there's a part somewhere in the book where, I don't know if it's the brother that visits him and he's acting crazy or whatever. And his brother was saying, you need to start acting normal if you want to get out of here.
Yeah.
I must admit, I laughed at that. So he had that support structure.
And I agree with you, because I think his mother recognized that he was being over-medicated. And then she reduced the dosage of the medicine that he was taking. But it's interesting that when he was discharged from hospital, there was no follow-up whatsoever. It was just him and his mother, and they were basically left to get on with it. And she had to, unfortunately, get him sectioned a second time. And his friends, I mean, they were constantly worried about him, and they would go out looking for him. They would take him out and try and get him to just do normal things, rather than staying in the house where he was going through his mental psychotic episodes and just smoking weed. They'll try and get him out of the house. And it was them that got him into the first hospital that he went to.
Yes, they were. Whittington Hospital.
And they supported him through that. And also I think that it's really good that his mother recognized that he was being over-medicated. And I just think he was also one of the really lucky ones. Moving on to Hollywood and the glamour, how different was his experience in the US compared to what he experienced in the UK?
Well, he seems to totally come alive in America.
Mm-hmm.
And he seems to get the opportunities to do the work that he craved for, because he talks about, you mentioned that there's repetition in the book, that he does keep repeating that, in the UK, I'm always a policeman or a lawyer, and it's the same old. But in America, it seemed he was able to break through and he was able to shine.
Yeah, I think he definitely got a lot more opportunities than he did in the UK. And it's interesting, I can't remember who I was listening to on the radio the other day, and they were discussing black actors basically leaving the UK to go and work in America. And I think the presenter was asking why black actors tend to do that. And this person, I can't remember who it was a male black actor, I was saying, the reason why black actors leave the UK to go to the US is because there are just more black TV programs in the US. And I thought that was so narrow-minded, because you shouldn't, as we were saying earlier on, a character shouldn't be written for a person of a certain race. A black actor should be able to play any character. So I was a bit disappointed hearing a black person say that on radio. Yeah, but coming back to Hollywood, he met quite a few really famous people, didn't he?
Yes. I mean, as he became more successful and well-known and famous himself, what came across to me in the book was how he never seemed to really put himself as somebody that other people wanted to meet. Yeah. He was just delighted to meet other well-known names and that. And I thought that was quite a nice aspect of his character, that he sort of seemed to keep that modesty, or he didn't sort of seem to be throwing himself around as the big man now when he's very well known.
Yeah, I think I felt a bit disappointed was that he was meeting people like Maya Angelou, he was meeting people like Sidney Poitier, Al Pacino, and all of that. And it just seemed like he was just like, meh. There was no. I don't know. I guess I just wanted a bit more excitement, and I don't feel like I got that.
He did actually live with Vanessa Redgrave, which is what I'm trying to understand what the nature of the, shall we say, friendship was.
I think you and many of us are trying to understand, because 2 years is a long time to live
It
with.
is a long time.
Was it? Well, anyway, we'll leave that there. Okay, so how does the memoir inspire or challenge you to reflect on your own identity, your mental health, and your sense of belonging?
I mean, it certainly got me thinking about my own family who've lived in the UK and were born here and schooled here, and some of the challenges. I mean, I have one in particular who's had mental health issues. She's probably in 40s now, and I've always been quite, I won't say dismissive, but I've always been like, come on, get your act together. I've never quite understood the backstory of growing up in this country and facing this type of racism, and also not talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, in a way, it's almost solitary, because you're the thing about racism, it's one of those things that's quite tricky. Well, in modern day, in the sense that you may have a racist experience, but it could be, you could think, oh, maybe someone's just had a bad day. I mean, you can't think everything that happens to you is because of racism. It's a race issue. You start by eliminating, or maybe, let's say you go into a shop and a lady doesn't serve you as they should. You might think, oh, maybe this lady's had a bad day. You'll think all sorts of things. And when you've actually eliminated everything, then you think, oh, maybe she could be racist. But so, it's a process of elimination. So you're constantly talking to yourself about, especially in modern day when it's quite subtle and it's not in your face. I mean, I do appreciate the challenges that probably a lot of my family members faced growing up in this country. And in fact, how resilient they are.
Mm-hmm.
I hadn't quite looked at it that way.
That subtlety of not really knowing, you don't know, you can never be sure. I know one of my sons was having some problem in a former job, and I said to him, do you think there's issues with your management? And, it's like impossible to know. Yeah. And that's very undermining for your mental health, because there's no reason to think that it was. But if that's possible in your mind, it's an extra undermining factor, isn't it? If you know somebody's attacking you, you know where the threat's coming from and you can see it and you can deal with it. When you're never really sure if it's just something that happens in ordinary life. I mean, like, for example, once my husband phoned up for a job and they told him that the applications are closed. So I phoned up for the same one because we weren't sure. Maybe they took his accent or maybe something like that. I phoned up and they told me the same thing. So then you think, oh, well, okay, the applications have closed. Mm-hmm. But if you don't do that, you think, was that... And that's very bad for your mental health, isn't it? Because it's this extra thing eating away, which might not even be there. Yeah. Sometimes it is.
Yeah. Yes. So you're kind of having to always second guess whether or not someone is being racist, mm-hmm. or whether actually it's just in your head. And living like that.
Yeah, that is very damaging.
Or they could be just bad people and they're mean to everyone. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it's so tricky having to navigate that on a day-to-day basis.
And I think for me, the book, it made me think a lot about my brother. As I said, my brother has schizophrenia. He's also had bouts of psychosis where I think... at some point, he was found in a derelict building, and he says that he was hearing voices talking to him, telling him to go and do things. So when David was talking about, being spoken to by Martin Luther King and being directed to go to Camden, and I don't know, was it to rescue the world or something?
To go to a shop in Camden, and I can't remember what he was supposed to do once he got to the shop, but the shop was closed anyway because it was 3 in the morning.
3 in the morning.
Can you imagine if that voice had told him to jump off a bridge?
Exactly.
He would have jumped.
Exactly. When we were discussing this as a book club, one thing that someone said is that whilst he was going through this, he was oblivious to how it was affecting those people around him. So he had that scenario when he was filming for the TV program where he then went back and talked to his friends, the ones that took him to the hospital in the first place. And he was, he just thought that his whole experience was a breeze. And then they were telling him that actually that's not how they remembered it. And so it does make you think about this mental health thing. It doesn't just affect the person who's suffering. No. It also affects everybody who's involved in their lives, be it friends or family. And I don't think there's enough support for the friends and the family either. Because at the end of the day, what happens is the system just chucks you out after you've come out of hospital and you're supposed to get on with it.
But what I'm hoping that the book has done is just removed the shame, because I think people hide their illness because of the shame. And I'm hoping that this book will change lives, basically.
I would like to think that this make a big difference because, here he is someone really famous who's been on all these TV programs and he's gone through mental health challenges and he's come out on the other side. I do hope that, people can see that, if someone like this can do it, so can they. But I'm skeptical as to whether or not he's actually going to have that impact.
I was just reminded, as you're talking, I was just reminded of, when you get on the train and there's certain seats for people with disabilities, and then there is this thing that some disabilities are invisible. So if you see a physically abled person sitting on that chair, you will be very judgmental. You'll be like, where are your crutches? That type of thing. Or you're not pregnant. Like we must see that you are ill.
Yeah.
And obviously with mental health,
you can't see it.
It's invisible.
Yeah.
Or until you start taking your clothes off in broad daylight and walking down the street, but then it's far too late.
Yeah. And I think that's part of the reason as to why many people suffer in silence, because it's not something that's seen, and so you don't get the treatment for it.
But also there seems to be a thing that it brings shame on the family, and I'm trying to understand how.
Yeah.
Why? Why do we think that it brings shame on it's an illness?
But does that come back to this, I guess, religion, number one, religion, but second thing is the witchcraft?
Oh.
This whole idea of witchcraft and voodoo and all of that. Is that not part of it?
Which also makes people, the sort of treatment people seek is looking for the person who's doing it to you, not dealing with the fact that it's part of the person who's suffering. It's external.
Mm-hmm. This is an issue that doesn't affect just Black people. Okay, the treatment of Black people is more aggravated by racism, but I think the fact that the funding for mental health clinics and hospitals is so dire, I think that basically means it affects everybody, not just Black people.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the book, like you say, a lot of people, it's not going to reach them and it probably won't make any difference, but if it reaches some people, it's a process, isn't it? Hopefully, eventually, it changes a wider group of people.
The book is inspired by a TV program that he did, and that itself was inspired by a tweet that he sent out, World Mental Health Day. And then there was just a huge outpouring of people getting in touch with him because of the tweet. Some people because, they didn't realize he'd actually gone through it because he'd managed it so well and they hadn't realized he'd gone through it. But actually there were a whole lot of other people who were going through the same things that he'd been through. And then that obviously inspired him then to do the TV program, where he then went back and retraced his journey, his mental health journey, and went back to the hospitals and tried to retrieve his records for the times that he was sectioned. Now, he does say that as a result of the TV program, people were coming to him on the street to talk to him, to shake his hand, and to thank him for what he did with the TV program. So I'm hoping that this will have some kind of impact as well. And if not, this inspires us to tell more people to go and watch the TV program, even if they don't read the book. He mentioned that although he got his records, he didn't open them. Do you understand why he didn't open them?
Yes, I do. I mean, when I was reading the part of the book where he was, they were doing the documentary, I actually felt worried. I felt like he was putting a lot of pressure on himself for that something might be triggered. And I was wondering if he was going to, because I don't know anything about the man before I read the book, really. So I wondered if he would have any relapse or there would be any incident. I was quite relieved that nothing like that happened. So, yes, I can quite see why he'd be nervous of opening that.
He did struggle a bit when he was making the program.
He did, but he didn't, significantly relapse. Fortunately, people seem to be taking care of him a bit. Yeah, at certain places, the way he stated it in the book, I felt like he was putting himself under a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think especially when he went out with the unit, that special unit that went out to people who were having breakdowns. So what were some of the most memorable or impactful moments or anecdotes from the book for you? So for me, it was when he was sectioned the second time, and then his brother told him to start acting normal. And then it was, with the toothpaste, when he would try and go and brush
yes.
And then just the whole process, I just felt so sad. So sorry for him while he was trying to do that, and then how he describes it in his head and how long it took for him to actually just squeeze out the toothpaste, and then he couldn't squeeze it out onto the toothbrush itself, and then did he not use his hand to brush his teeth in the end, and just the whole process, and then the clock on the wall as well. So just the description of that for me, just like, wow, this is heartbreaking that a grown man or any person can go through this.
I think for me it was the football match.
Yeah.
That he decided that he's going to go and watch because he's an elite supporter, so why not? And then just that whole scene. I mean, I think just the realization that actually there are thousands of voices and they're shouting at, it's me they're looking at. I found that really heartbreaking. And to the point where initially he was going to sit down and then it became too overwhelming. He had to leave. Mm-hmm. I found that incredibly sad.
But I felt, I think we said earlier on, he was really naive because, this was in the 80s. He should have known that that's what was going to happen.
But I think it was really sad for me who was not here in the 80s. Just because, you have the context. Just to think that could actually happen to you, for me, is mind-blowing.
Mm. Yeah.
It's actually really shocking. You would have been fairly young as well. So to do that to a child, because this was before he went to London, so it was before he was 17. You think of your own child and you think, my goodness, imagine if one of my children, I only have one, but if they went through that,
he's hard.
And I bet you he didn't go back and tell his parents.
Probably not.
Yeah. Perhaps because I'm sure part of him must have known that was a possibility. And perhaps he wouldn't tell his parents because they'd have said to him, why did you go there? It's surely that's, likely to happen to you, which is shameful, isn't it? But I think the also that story of when he was very little and the old man comes and abuses him. And when you think about it, you know, I mean, I felt that's so awful that somebody could do that to a little child. But also, when I thought of it a second time through, you know, I'm sure this old man has got his own mental health issues, which are not being treated, you know, which he's not being supported with. And then,
but Katrina, would you say that racism is a mental illness? Because if you think about it, he's not the only one.
No, I don't think racism is a mental illness, but I wouldn't be at all surprised if an elderly person who goes and berates a little child for, you know,
it happens regularly.
Are you talking about race or just generally?
No, I'm just talking about in that scenario, what happened to him in that scenario. It's something that happened all over and over and over again. And it wasn't just young people that were being racist. It was older people that were being racist. I used to live opposite this family where the guy, it was an elderly guy, but he used to come and shout at us all the time, telling us to go back where we came from. Now, I can't say that he was mentally unwell.
It sounds like a mental disturbance.
I'm sorry?
It sounds like a mental disturbance to me. But no, I get what you mean. Yeah, well, maybe not. Maybe that's got nothing to do with it then, but it's still terribly shameful. And it's bizarre to me. I mean, if you've got an issue with somebody, surely it would be his parents you would take it out with. You know, why would you pick on a little child?
They don't care. And also there's this whole thing where young black children are, how would I describe it? Where we young black children are treated as adults.
You know, I was thinking about this when I was thinking about, you know, when he has his first girlfriend and the father of the girl invites him to the house to have a talk. And I was trying to sort of understand what the father was trying to say, but it didn't make any sense. I mean, all he was saying is that,
you're black.
You know, people should stay with their own. And that's it. And you say, well, why? What will happen if you don't? You know, for a grown up, you know, the story, it wasn't well developed, was it, that conversation from a grown up? And then, of course, and somewhere along the way, he then changes his mind and he says, it's okay now. So
we accept you.
I mean,
you're right.
I'm assuming it stems from fear. You know, maybe the family of this white girl, you know, maybe no one's ever dated outside their race.
Well, probably
and
not in that era.
Sorry?
I wouldn't expect it at that time that
yes,
there
and
would
therefore
be much experience of that too. And what it to me it says is that there's this brainwashing of, you know, that there is something wrong with black people, that, you know, white people are in some way superior. This brainwashing that's gone on through colonization and everything. And then this man, he's never stopped to think about it until the day that his daughter is dating somebody who is black. And that conversation, as much as we saw it, to me sounded like somebody who's just talking out loud, trying to think of something he's never really thought about before, and chooses to do it with the young man present, which isn't very nice. And eventually sort of think, oh, well, perhaps it doesn't really matter. You know, like he's never thought about it before. And it makes him uncomfortable because he's been brought up thinking this isn't a good thing to happen. And then he eventually thinks, well, perhaps it doesn't matter. You know, it just shows me how society is brainwashed.
Do you think that he changed his mind about black people? Or was it more one of these, oh, you're right, we know you're right, so we will accept you?
Perhaps. I've no idea. But I think perhaps his daughter has also sort of nagged him and worn him down, and he's just, you know, it could be either very likely what you're saying, Jackie, that he's talked to him. Like, I mean, any father, when their young daughter is meeting somebody, especially going back, you know, in more traditional times perhaps, might want to vet that person a bit.
Yeah.
I don't think that's particularly unusual.
No. I mean, the vetting is not unusual.
Yeah. It's more the fact that he said to him, well, you can't date my daughter because you're black.
But isn't that what, all the things we've read, with like Kahindi and all these things, this has been a message that has been running through the society in order to justify all these colonial ideas, isn't it? So it takes, those messages don't just evaporate. You can't brainwash people and give people all these biased histories for generations, and then it just evaporates.
So, what are some of the questions or topics that you'd like to ask or discuss with David Harewood had you the opportunity? Obviously, I thought everyone was going to say what went on with Vanessa Redgrave.
I'd be asking him, do you have black friends now? I'm joking.
So Yvonne, you'd ask whether or not he has any black friends. Because he's married to a white lady. What I would like to know, actually, with what factor has race played in his relationship, and also what kind of conversations does he have with his children? I think he's got 2 daughters. What kind of conversations does he have with his children about race? I would like to explore that a little bit more.
But also, just another thing, just going back to, in his opinion, is it possible to be black and British and feel welcome and wholesome?
Well, yeah, that's a loaded one. The other thing I was going to say, his father, and we haven't actually talked very much about his family and his father in particular, because his father did have a mental health issue and was sectioned when he was young. I would like to know, once he'd recovered, whether or not he actually had any conversations around his breakdown with his father, whether they sat down and talked about it. Because once he'd recovered, he just goes off back to acting and then off to Hollywood. He doesn't really say what happened with his family or what his relationship was or is with his family. The only bit we know about is that he went to stay with his mother for a bit and that his brother visited. That's about it. So he's left out a lot of stuff about his relationship with his family. I would like to know more about that.
Well, I don't. I mean, I'm quite happy to respect his privacy on that, because I feel like I don't want to know what went on with, and of course I do want to know what went on with him and Vanessa Redgrave, but I respect him for not telling us anything about it, if there is anything to tell, of course. But because I don't think it's appropriate, really. But I would be interested to...
You can't say that I lived with a woman for 2 years and not think that people are going to wonder.
Well, let them wonder. That's, people can wonder, can't they? That's fine, but it's not... I don't know. I prefer that he doesn't... I would not respect him if he had told us. Unless he made it very clear that she wanted him to or something. And maybe there's nothing to tell. We don't know. But the questions I would like to ask him, if he believes that a big part of his psychosis was triggered by that, this idea of him splitting off as a little black boy and putting that aside, in what he thinks, how that has influenced his upbringing of his own children. And whether there's a way in which he feels they could be protected from that sort of situation, or what he's done to try and strengthen them in that way. That would be what I'd be interested in.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think, we'll end there. So before we go then, just a summary of the book. Score out of 5 and just final last words on the book.
I found it to be a great book. As I say, I found it to be really powerful. And it's that sort of intersection between race, identity, and mental health that was being examined. And I think he did a good job. So I would say 4 out of 5.
Okay. Now, Katrina.
I would give it 3.5 in terms of the content of the book and the discussions it provokes. But the actual the actual writing was less wowed by. So I could only give it 3 on that. I feel like it is very pedestrian points, the way it's, and then I met, kind of thing.
And that's where my problem started, and that was the beginning of my problems. That phrase comes up a lot, and I just got a bit tired of it. Anyhow, I am with Katrina. I give it a 3 out of 5. And the reason Yvonne's shocked. I agree. It brings up a lot of discussion points, and it's covering a really, really important topic. And that's why, that's my reason for giving it a 3 out of 5. I found it quite, I wouldn't say boring. The beginning, when he's talking about his family, was very captivating, very interesting. And then at the end, where he now starts analyzing race and identity, again, captivating and interesting. The middle bit, I was like, what the hell? Come on, just get on with it. And I just think that maybe it could have been edited better to make it more, in my view, readable. I'll end on that note. Thank you, Katrina. Thank you, Yvonne. Thank you guys so much. Have a wonderful evening. And thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this or any of the other episodes, please like, share, or subscribe on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts. Till next time, goodbye.